Hey there everybody, Eric from Outer Limitless coming at you today with another video. Now today's video is going to be a fun one, and that's because we're going to talk about a blade in my absolute favorite blade size class. Today we are going to talk about the Becker BK12. This is a 6-inch camp knife. It's a combat knife, camp knife. For me it's a camp knife. I'm not too much into combat, but this blade for me is what I'm going to say, hopefully going to be my favorite Becker. I've held this blade in my hand for a few days now, and I'm really excited to put it to use. I very much like the BK series. I love their handles. And actually, if you think about it, what other knife series can you think about that covers such a huge range of sizes, all with that same handle? So you either like it or you don't. Personally, I very much like this handle. So to have a Becker with the handle in this particular size range, a 6-inch blade, is definitely sweet. Now I thought the BK7 was great. I think this thing's definitely gonna push a little bit above that for me in terms of what I like in a blade, and I just can't wait to show this to you and get things going. So if you want to see more about this Becker BK12, stay tuned. Now to get this thing started, I thought I would show this BK12 right in line with the rest of its family. So these are the Becker BK knives that I have. This is the Becker BK29, BK9, which most of you are probably familiar with, BK5, BK7, here's that BK12, the BK15, and the BK11. Now for me, the knife that most resembled the blade in the size class that I tend to like for a camp knife is the BK7, but I've always been a huge fan of the SE6 and blades in that 6-inch blade class size. So to come across a Becker with that Becker handle that is in that 6-inch range is definitely sweet. Now there's another blade out there that is somewhat similar. That would be the Becker BK10. I believe they call that the Crewman. Now this actually, if you look at this BK12, is a little bit different than that BK10, simply because it exhibits a high grind and also a drop point design. It does not have a swedge. If you look at a lot of the Becker series, like for example this BK7, it does have an unsharpened swedge at the top, and very similarly also with that BK9. But this BK12 does not have that, so it is a great blade profile in terms of what I tend to like. I think overall this blade is going to be in excellent shape for general camp tasks, and I'm very much looking forward to getting this out into the field. And now briefly matching this up against some other blades you may be familiar with. Here we have the SE6, here we have the Becker Vox Rolled, and here the Benchmade Arvensis. Some great wilderness blades here. You'll see that if you look at what I typically like, you have that 6-inch blade with a finger choil. But even though the BK12 does not have a finger choil, I think it will react in a way that is very preferential to my liking. Now just getting a little bit deeper into the details. Obviously, because this is a Becker series knife, it has that same exact Becker handle. Now in this particular case, you'll see that the BK12, I have the original factory handle scales, and on this BK7, I have added a micarta option. Now these scales are basically almost identical in size, but the micarta is obviously a better overall grip than the stock handles, so a lot of people do like to upgrade them. I will upgrade this knife for sure. I can tell you that at this point after handling it, this is a blade that's going to be sticking around for a while, so it is worth the investment to upgrade the handle scales. The overall blade features between this BK12 and the BK7 are very similar. You'll see the exposed pommel on the end of the blade, lanyard hole, same exact bolt pattern on the handle scales. You'll see there's a little bit of a finger guard on both of these blades. The sharpening choil, both of these have a thumb ramp, identical with a little bit of jimping on there, that nice high grind, and then really when you get into the actual blade shape is where these really differ. So obviously the BK12 having that drop point design, and then a little more of a Bowie style tactical blade on the BK7. Now another fundamental difference is the actual overall manufacturing. Both of these blades are 1095, but the BK7 is the K-bar version. Now the BK12 was produced through Rowen, which if you're familiar with ESEE or Tops knives, many of the Tops knives and I believe all of the ESEE knives are heat treated through Rowen. And so Ethan Becker and Doug Ritter teamed up with Rowen to produce this actual blade. So a little bit different in that regard, where the Becker BK7 was ultimately produced through K-bar and this BK12 through Rowen. And I haven't even mentioned it yet, but the actual designation for this BK12 is the RSK MK2, and that stands for Ritter Survival Knife MK2. And when it was originally designated the BK12 is when Becker was teamed up with Camillus. So historically the BK12 name came from a time when the Becker knives were actually produced from Camillus, not through K-bar. And again, this BK12 being produced ultimately through Rowen. So anyway, a little bit of difference in terms of the overall manufacturing, overall blade shape, but a lot of great similarities. So if you're familiar with any of the blades in the Becker BK series, this BK12 will definitely be familiar to you. And with that said, this RSK MK2 is a KnifeWorks exclusive, so it is basically the only place you can get your hands on this knife. Now you may be able to find it aftermarket, which actually I did, but for the most part it's pretty much one source where you can pick up this blade. Now one of the interesting features on this blade is that on the inside of the handle, when you remove the scales, there are some removable weights. So I'm going to take out my Allen wrench right now and pop off these handle scales, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now here on the inside of the handle, you can see those 3 removable weights. Now that's in an effort to create just a little bit of balance, basically to make it a little more, call it handle weighted versus blade weighted. So obviously if you remove these, you'd be shifting the overall center balance closer to the front of the blade. Now I don't think that with the plastic handle scales, I would mess around with this too much for myself. I would probably leave these where they are currently to get a nice even balance. But I can tell you, once you go to the micarta handle scales, the micarta scales themselves do have some more weight to them. So I would probably remove, maybe all 3 of these even, and I'm going to do a little bit of an experiment a little later on to see kind of how these weights stack up in the different handle scales and what they weigh, so we'll get into that. But I have a suspicion that I would ultimately remove these 3 weights if I do go with the micarta handle scales. Now one thing that you will notice is that you do need 2 different size hex keys in order to maintain this knife. You need one size for the actual handle scales and then another size to remove the weights. And that reason is that these weights themselves are just standard hardware. They are actually a typical factory pipe plug. So they're just like a little brass pipe plug. And so basically these are sort of like standard hardware. And so when you get into the handle scales for these Becker knives, obviously they have their own size standard hardware. So in that regard, you do need 2 different size Allen wrenches. This is a 4mm and a 3/16 of an inch. So metric for the actual blade and American for the actual removal of these plugs. Now with these factory scales, you'll notice the balance of the knife is pretty well centered, kind of around the center of the blade. So overall, if I just sort of lightly pinch that forward bolt hole, you'll notice the blade hangs almost perfectly level. So this, with the factory scales and all 3 of those weights, gives you a very neutral overall blade weight and handle weight. So it's very neutral and overall balanced right in the center. Now I'm going to go the complete opposite direction here, and I will pull these weights all out completely, and then I'll show you the balance point with these removed from the handle. So we'll get these out of here, we'll put those scales back on, and then we'll see what we have for an overall balance. So now I've basically removed the weight out of the handle, and getting back to this, you'll see now if I kind of try to balance the blade right at the center of the handle, it does tend to want to tip forward. So if I grab it again, sort of on that central bolt hole, and it's not giving you the best example, but it is leaning forward a little bit more. Really, once you get to that overall balance point where you're gripping the knife, if you look at that sort of fulcrum point there, the knife really does want to tip itself forward. So it definitely makes a difference. I can tell you that just grabbing the blade now and holding it, I do like the way it feels much better without the weights in it. That blade was quite heavy with the weights in there, and I actually think it feels a little more nimble with the weights removed. So anyway, it does make a difference, but it's obviously a pretty neat feature. I'd rather have it than not have it. Some people call it gimmicky. I think having features is always an enhancement, even if you don't need them. It's nice that it's there. Okay, so now we're going to run a real quick experiment. Here I have my scale. So I'm going to put the BK12. Here's the original factory handle scales with the hardware. So we'll make sure that we get all of this on here. So it's the original scales. And then the 3 weights. So once I get all that on there, you'll see here that we have a full 13 point, call it 1. So 13.1 ounces with the blade, the factory handle scales, and those 3 weights. Removing the 3 weights, this is now 12.8 ounces. So each one of these weights is basically 0.1 ounces. So again, you can really fine tune the handle if you want to and get this thing balanced. So let's see, 13, it's ringing in at 13.0, call it 13.0 or 13.1. So now we're going to mix it up a little bit. And let's get these micarta handle scales on here. And I got to make sure I add the hardware. So we'll get that hardware. And you'll see here, 13.6 ounces. So these micarta handle scales do add a significant amount of overall weight, which is why I was saying to you it might make sense to completely remove these brass weights when you go to the micarta handle scales, so you can see that these scales themselves are already shifting the overall balance of the weight of the blade. So pretty significant difference between the weight of these original factory scales and the micarta aftermarket scales. And now just for one more quick comparison, again here I have the BK12 with all the hardware and then the micarta handle scales. I do not have the weights installed on the knife. And so right now we have 13.6 ounces. Just for the comparison, I will pull all of this off, get this scale back down to 0. And now let's weigh up my BK7, which does also have those aftermarket micarta scales. Putting it on there, 14.4. So a little bit more overall weight to this BK7. And so just again, one last quick little experiment, adding the scales, getting the hardware back on there, and now the brass plugs, 14.1. So if you do like a slightly heavier blade and you kind of like the weight that you get out of the BK7, granted you do get a lot of advantage with the extra inch on that overall blade weight, and this is actually pretty balanced with the micarta scales. But if you do like the weight of this BK7, you could certainly consider keeping the plugs installed in this BK12 to give you a little bit more heft. Now at 3/16 of an inch thick, this blade stock is literally identical to the BK7 or the BK9. Just at an initial glimpse here, it appears as though this BK12 might just be ever so slightly thicker, but I believe that's because it still has the factory coating on it, where the BK7 I have stripped. Now, if you look at the actual coating on this BK12, it is more of a gray color. If you compare it, say, for example, to this BK16, you'll see that the BK12 is actually a gray, and it's really nice. It's a great overall look, nicely coated. It has a little bit of traction to it. I can tell you this for sure, I will be stripping this blade. I love stripping my 1095 blades. I really enjoy the process of stripping it and customizing it a little bit and adding a patina, and so I typically will strip my 1095 blades, and that will definitely be the case here. Overall, the typical feeling in the hand is similar to any other of the Becker knives. However, I typically don't like these thumb ramps. I prefer a finger choil, but where this doesn't have the finger choil, it's actually very comfortable with this thumb ramp at this length of a blade. Now I can really sort of imagine what this is going to feel like when I'm doing some work, and how it's going to feel in my hands, just with that thumb ramp being really actually overall pretty good for the weight and shape and size of this blade. When you get to the slightly larger Beckers, I feel like this is just not quite right. I mean, just not quite right for the BK7. I think I would prefer this just to be ground down, and that is definitely the case for me with the BK9. And in fact, I was even at the point where I added a finger choil so I could completely get myself away from that ramp. And so ultimately on this BK12, even though it doesn't have the finger choil and it does have that ramp, I think it's going to work mighty nice. And at this point where I've actually removed the weights and don't have them underneath these factory scales, this knife feels very nimble and nice and light in my hand, and with my thumb on that ramp, feels very controlled. Now, the stock sheath is pretty similar to all other Becker sheaths. For the most part, these knives come with pretty much just a standard ballistic nylon sheath with a pouch. This particular knife is no different, and if you look here, the only notable difference you'll see is that it's just kind of marketed directly to the Doug Ritter Becker on the front of this thing. And so I mean, really, it's a pretty standard sheath, no frills about it. And when you look at DougRitter.com, if you read up on the actual write-up that they've included about this particular knife, you'll see that they specifically went with a plain ballistic nylon sheath for the fact that most people, if they get serious about a knife, will want to kydex it or get a custom option anyway. And for me, that was definitely true. So here I have an AZ Welke custom kydex sheath specific to this knife, perfectly form fit, excellent profile, excellent retention, nice thumb ramp. And what I'm planning on doing is pretty much stealing the BK7 AZ Welke sheath's dangle system. So I will pull this off of here and add it to this BK12 sheath, and I will have myself a beautiful custom option. And finally, the last thing I plan on doing is getting myself some of the Knife Connection G10 or micarta handle scales. I think that will be an excellent option for this. Strip the blade, add the handle scales, and with this custom kydex, this knife will definitely be rocking. So alright guys, there you have it. A real quick look at the Becker BK12, Doug Ritter designed RSK MK2 Perseverance. This for me is a blade in that ideal 6-inch camp knife size. I absolutely love the look and feel of this blade. I'm totally pumped to have my hands on it, and I really do think that this is quickly going to become my overall favorite Becker, if you can believe that. So guys, I strongly suggest a couple of things. First and foremost is there's a lot of other excellent reviews online about this, most notably Gideon's Tactical. If you're familiar with Aaron at Gideon's Tactical, he did do an excellent review on this knife, so I suggest you checking it out. Second is, the pretty much only place you can buy this is KnifeWorks, so it is a KnifeWorks exclusive, so go to knifeworks.com and check it out for yourself. And finally, the last thing is Doug Ritter has a wonderful website with a great write-up on this blade. Very interesting. Gives you the total history, much more than I could have provided with you today. So that's another source you should definitely check out. So alright guys, thanks for stopping by. I hope you like what you saw. I hope you found it a little bit informative. If you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Take care now. I'll see you soon.